Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tips and Tricks webinar. My name is Nick, and I'll be doing the presentation with you today. I will be recording this class, so that way you can go back and review this at a later date and see all the different time-saving tips that we're going to give you. I have quite a list here to get through, so I want to try and get through as many of these as possible, but I'm also going to leave a bit of the class to allow you to answer or to ask some questions. So at any point during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and type that into the questions area. And at the end of the class, I'll go through and answer any questions that you may have had about any of the tips or tricks that we're going to cover today. So again, I want to try and get through these, so I'm going to jump right in here. And one of the very first things that I get asked all the time and try to get people try to move their model after it's been inserted. And one of the things that you may find is if you've inserted multiple locations, it can be quite cumbersome trying to get everything to line up once it's already been inserted. So one of the first tips I want to talk about is moving an entire model within your model space after you've already inserted a bunch of elements. So the very first thing you want to do is you want to go up to Settings and Document Settings. Underneath Settings and Document Settings, you're going to find the Building Aids tab. And in here, you're going to see two options under Drawing Assistance. You're going to see Enable Collision Control, and you're going to see Select Elements on Current Location only while in plan view. Now, these two are going to need to be unchecked, and I'll tell you why. Mainly what's going to happen here is when you select the select elements on current location only while in plan view, what this is essentially saying is you're only able to select elements on the location you're currently on. So if I have a foundation plan, which I do here, I'm not able to select through here and select anything on the foundation. It's only going to select elements on the ground floor. So I want to disable that because I want to move the foundation with the ground floor. And if I have a second floor, I want to move all three locations at the same time. The other option is collision. And collision will not allow you to move an object if it interferes with another object. So if we're going to be moving this entire model over, even if it's over a foot, it's going to say, well, this wall is going to interfere with the wall that's already there, so no, it's not going to work. So we want to make sure that that is also disabled. Once you've disabled both options, simply say Apply and then OK. And then you can create a crossing window around the floor plan, right-click, Move, and now you can move this anywhere that you want to. And I'm just going to move this kind of in the middle of my plan. I'm going to drop it in right there, and it's going to add it in. Now the foundation may look like it didn't move. That's just, it needs to update. So all I need to do is switch to my foundation plan, and you'll see that it did actually move. It just needed to be updated. So if I go back to the ground floor, everything moved. It's now centered in my plan the way that I want. You always want to make sure you go back to Settings and Document Settings, and then under your Building Aids, enable these two options again. They are very handy when it comes to making sure that elements aren't going to be inserted inside of other objects, and it's going to also prevent you from accidentally selecting something on a different location that you didn't mean to. So again, make sure that you enable these back on, say Apply, and then OK. And that is moving your model within your model space so that every location moves with it all at once. The next tool tip I want to talk about is a window in a gable end wall. So if I zoom in down here, and right now I have a window in my ground floor wall, and it's sitting at the 6'8" head height. But I have a nice large gable roof here, and I want to put a window in that gable end. So I'm going to go up, I'm going to select the Windows option, and I'm just going to select a window, and we'll just grab a 2 foot by 2 foot window. And when I bring it in, it's going to try and insert it at that 6'8" head height, because that is what the building locations define. But we also have a head height input option here. And what we're going to do is I can actually type in a new value in here. And I'm going to type in 12 feet. I know that that is higher than 6'8", and I know that since my window is 2 feet, that it's going to sit above the window in below it. So I know that that will work. The trick here is you got to remember to press Tab. If you do not press Tab on your keyboard, it will not lock that value in, and you will lose it when you go to hit enter. It will just assume 6'8" still. So again, make sure you tab out once you've typed in your distance. You can then move it into the drawing area, and then you can go right click and you can say center on wall, and it will drop that into the center of the wall itself. From there, we can go in and say, well, I want to look at that in my 3D view so we can see how that looks. I'm just going to go up into 3D and select that view, and I can now see how that window is going to look in that gable end. This same feature can be used for creating a vent in your gable end as well. The difference here is you're going to want to create a new type of window. So over here, I'm going to select one of these windows. I'm just going to select any one. I'm going to go right click, and I'm going to say add element. I'm just going to say I want to use the window block. I'm going to say open or OK. This will allow me to create a new window. I can leave it as an octagon if I want to. I can say I just want it to be rectangular. I want it to be, let's say, a width of 1'6" with a height of 2. I only want that to be one panel. But one thing I want to change is the type of window. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the very end, and I'm going to select louvered. Now, since I have louvered selected, it's still seeing this as glass. In my appearance, I can change this so that glass is going to use the same color as the frame. So if I want it to be eggshell, if I want it to be a different color, I can change the glass to be a different material. And this is where I'm just going to go up to colors. I'm going to select the eggshell and say OK. And over here, if I turn this into a rendered outline view, we can see that it's now creating a louvered type of vent that we would use in our gable ends. I can also increase the number of louvers, so I can say 8. So it's a little bit thinner for those vents. I can then say I'm going to give it a new name. I'm just going to call this Gable vent. And I can give it a size if I wanted to as well. So we'll just say 1'6" by 2'0", and we'll say Gable vent. And then we'll say OK. Now attached to my cursor is that gable vent, and I can bring it in again using my head height. I can type in 12 feet, press tab to lock in the value, move it into my drawing area, right click, center on wall, and it will drop in that vent in the gable end. Again, I will now see how that's going to look. I can also flip the opening so that the vent is towards the outside, and you will get that type of look. And that gable end vent can be a circle, an octagon, an arch if you wanted to. You can create that in any shape that you want for your gable end vents. Another question that we get is in regards to dimensions and updating their dimension styles so that they use a smaller or bigger font in their text or a different style altogether. So what you can do is, if it's just one or two dimensions that you want to adjust in the drawing, you can simply select a dimension, right click, and you can say I want to change that dimension style. So if you change it, you can then say I want that one to be an arrow, and you can click on it and you can say OK. What that does is it will change just that one dimension style to be that dimension with an arrow. What you can also do is say, well, I want to change it, but I want this one particular dimension style to be a different style that has larger text. So to do that, what you would do is you would need to create a new dimension style. So in here, if I select standard, I go right click, add dimension, and I'm just going to call this standard, and I'm going to say large. From here, I'm going to keep everything else the same. I just want the text to be larger. So I'm going to go to the text style. I'm going to select dimensions text. And I'm going to go in and say I want to create a new dimension style. And we're going to go in and say right click, add text. And I'm going to call this dimensions large. You can name it whatever you want. And I'm going to go in and say I want this to be 1/4 of an inch. So it's larger than an 1/8. So I'm going to go in and say OK and OK. And you can now see how that's going to look. that will allow you to see a larger dimension style, a larger text style in your dimension. And then you can say OK, and you can then say, and it'll adjust just that one dimension string. If you want to change all of your dimensions at the same time, then what you can do is go up to settings and then go into your current dimension style and say, I want to change this current dimension style to be standard large, and say OK, and then select OK. And then you can go in and just go to Tools, Dimensions, Auto Exterior Dimensions, and it will automatically update all of those dimensions for you. So again, if you want to change that dimension style, go to your Settings, Current Dimension Style, hit your Select option, change it to be a different style. We'll just go back to Standard. We'll say OK, and then OK. And then just go back to Tools, Dimensions, and select your Auto Exterior Dimension, and it will update that dimension string to show that dimension style. And then over here, we're just going to go back and say change style, and we're going to change this one back to our standard. So that takes care of how to add in your dimension styles. So what we're going to do next is we're going to show how to create a window well. So one of the first things you want to do when you're creating a window well is this is probably going to be inserted on your foundation. Now there are a couple of different ways that you can add in a window well. You can use a member and create it using members to show how you want that to look. The problem with a member is it's not going to cut the terrain out for you. So I like to use the wall command. And what I do is I go in and I go down to the foundation location because that's essentially where it's going to be inserted. But the one thing you need to change first is under settings, and then underneath your settings, document settings, is the terrain tab. And what the terrain tab does is there is an option in here where you can have the terrain automatically cut around a specific building location. And in this case, I want this to cut around the terrain. So that way when I insert this window well, it'll cut around the window well and remove the terrain from inside that window well. And I'll go in and I'll say foundation, and I'll say apply, and then I'll say OK. Now I need to create the window well. And again, like I was saying, there are a couple of different ways you can do this. Using a member is one, but the way that I like to do it is I like to use a wall. So I'm going to select the walls option, and then down in the bottom here under custom, I'm going to add in a new wall type. Doesn't matter what I select here. I'm just going to grab one of these walls. I'm going to go in and say right click. I'm going to say add element. I selected this container wall. It's got a blue material on the front of it. Again, that doesn't really matter. I'm going to make sure that this is set to the size that I want. I'm going to say I want this to be 1.5 inches thick. So I'm going to say 1.5 inches thick. That will reduce the size of that wall. I'm also going to get rid of any kind of exterior width on it. So it is just exactly 1.5 inches thick. Next thing I want to do is, again, you want to make sure that it's set to general because we don't want any framing information to be applied to this. So we just want to change that to be general. And then we want to go in and under the appearance tab, we're going to change all of this. I like the blue look here, so I'm just going to go in and select all of these, and I'm going to change this to be that metal panel. And so we're going to scroll down to metal. I believe it was under siding. No, sorry, cancel. That metal panel is actually, sorry, underneath metal, sorry. And so again, we're going to go all of these. So holding my shift key down, I can select all of those. And we're going to go in and select that metal option. And we're going to say metal. And then you can select any one of these really to show what you want that to look like. Again, we're just going to use that blue metal. We'll say OK. And then we can adjust the actual material as well. So I can say I want that to be 8 feet by 4'2", We'll say 90 to make it go on an angle, and then we'll say OK. And what we get is that type of look. And then I'm just going to call this window well. And I'll call it window well wall. And I'll say OK. So that will create that window well wall in the catalog for me so that I can use it again in the future if I ever need to. I'm then just going to simply bring it into my drawing area, and I'm just going to create a little window well out to the side of my design. Now, I'm also going to turn off angle snap here because I want to be able to go on an angle. So I'm just going to press F6 on my keyboard to allow me to draw on an angle. And I'm just going to kind of draw out a window well here. I'm not going to really do a lot of dimensioning here. I'm just going to bring this out and like so. So I'm going to create a window well, and I'm just going to add in those walls. I'm then going to go in, I'm going to curve this edge to create the curved look of that window well. And we'll curve this one out as well. So again, you can be as accurate as you want with this to show exactly how it's going to look. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a line between these two marks. What that does is it will now remove the terrain out from within inside that window well. And to do that, we're just going to go over to our floors, and we're going to select room division. I'm going to go room division from here to here, and I'm going to say finish. When I look at this in our 3D view, I'm just going to go to a front view, and I'm going to pull this camera around here. We'll see that window well and how it's sitting inside of our wall right now. So we can see that window well. It's being drawn in, and it's going all the way down to the base because I drew this on the foundation. So I can say, well, I don't want this to go all the way down. So I'm going to select these walls. I'm going to go into their properties, and I'm going to say that I want the top and bottom to be 4 feet. And I'll say OK. I'll then elevate that up, and I'll just say elevate, and we'll go up 4 feet. And we'll say OK, and OK. So now what I should see is that window well moved up so that it sits 4 feet above. And then I'm going to take this floor, and I'm actually going to change this to be a different material as well, so that way it looks like a gravel base. So I'm just going to call this gravel window well. And then I'm just going to change the appearance to be gravel. And in the catalog under our landscape materials, we have a couple of different gravel options. One of the other ones that I like to use is under stone, cultured stone. There is a water stone in here that looks a little bit more accurate to what you would use. And you can just say water stone or stream stone. And then again, you can change the size of that so that it fits a bit better. So we'll just say 1 foot by 1 foot, and that will reduce the size of the stones being used. And then we're just going to elevate that up 4 feet as well. Once we move that up 4 feet, we now have the basis of our window well. What you're seeing here is it's cutting out the terrain around the foundation, and I just need to move it into place. So what I would do from here is I can just select this, and I would say move, and I can now move this so that it sits kind of in front of this window, and I want to get it as close to the wall as I can, like so. And what that does is it now removes that terrain around that window well, and I can now see how that window well will fit beside my foundation plane. One of the nice things about doing it this way as well is I can go back into 2D, and I can say edit, select previous. I can then go right click and say add group. And what that does is it now adds that window well to the group. And sorry, that just removed. So I'm just going to go move. We'll move that out like so. And let's create a crossing window around that. And then we'll go in and say add group. And we'll say enter. And we can call that window well. Oh, I wonder, okay, sorry. We'll select that, and then we'll select the wall surface like so, and we'll go into here, and back here. Sorry, edit, select previous, and then we'll select these options here. This should allow me to select all of those elements, and then I can right click, add group, and say OK. And it should now add, well, we'll just call this window well. And then we can add this window well in to our group option, and we can say OK. And then I can move this into place again, like so. And what this does is it will now allow me to add in a window well again in the future. So I can go up to my groups option, and I can select the window well, and I can bring that in to use it again in my design somewhere else. And that's how you create a window well. Next, I'm going to go back up to our ground floor plan, and I'm going to go in and we're going to talk about view filter templates. And these are important because of the ability to be able to turn elements on or off as needed. Now, right now I have my floor plan set up to be showing absolutely everything. So I'm seeing the foundation, I'm seeing the ground floor, I'm seeing the roof, I'm seeing all the electrical in here and all of the electrical wiring. It can become quite a mess if you keep all of these elements on when you go to create your floor plans for your working drawing sheets. So what we've done is we've created the ability to create a template to allow you to adjust what you want to see at any given time. So by default, if I go down here to my view filter, or if I go up to view filter, and select the view filter option, you can see that there are two by default. There's a default and an elevation. Let's create a new one that turns off or turns on electrical elements. So if I go into view filter, I'm going to say that I want to create a new template. So I'm going to say new filter. I'm going to call this electrical. I'm going to go and call it electrical. And then I'm going to go in, and basically what this does is it gives you the ability to turn elements on or off. And right now this is showing you absolutely everything in the drawing that can be inserted. So this is where you can say, well, when I'm inserting an electrical plan, I don't really want to see roofs, for example. Let's turn the roofs off as an example. And maybe I don't want to see, let's just say I don't want to see the decking as well. We don't have a deck in here, but you can turn elements on and off as you need to. You can do the same for the terrain. So I can say, well, I don't want to see anything on the terrain. So I'm just going to say display none on the terrain when I'm working in my electrical plans. Notation, I want to make sure the electrical wiring is turned on. So I'm going to make sure that that's selected, but maybe I don't need to see anything else. I'm going to say, and then select save. And what that does is it now creates a new electrical option for me to use as a view template. So when I select that and I say apply, and then I say OK, it turns off everything except for the elements that were selected. So now I can see my electrical plan. Well, if I go back in here and I go back to that view filter and I say view filter and I look at it, I can say, well, default is still showing me all of the electrical stuff that I've already have on my electrical plan. So I may want to edit that. So I can select default and I can say edit filter. And I can say while I'm working on the default floor plan, I can turn off elements that I don't want to see. So maybe I don't want to see the actual wiring. I want to see the I want to see the elements where the switches and everything are, but I don't want to see the actual wiring. So I can go in and say on default, turn off electrical wiring, save, apply, and OK. And now everything turns back on. I can still see all my outlets, all my switches and my lights, but the wiring is turned off, and it will only be visible when I select the electrical plan to insert it. This is a big thing to keep in mind as well when you go to start inserting your elevation views. So by default, we talked about how the elevation view is already, or view filter is already set up in here. And again, that's because this is a big deal when you go to insert your elevations. What the elevation view filter does is it turns off all the elements that would never be seen on an elevation view. So what I mean by that is if I'm inserting a front elevation and I want to show that on my working drawing sheet, if I did not select this option, it would go in, it would try to create that front elevation, and when it goes into a working drawing sheet, it creates the lines of everything that's in the model. So if I have a couch inside that room, or I have appliances and cabinetry and toilets and bathtubs, even though they're in the model, they're not being seen, the program still has to go through and analyze it to say, do I need to add a line to this? And it will try and add a line to it. So when you insert an elevation, you may notice that sometimes your elevations take a while to insert. And that's just because the program needs to go through and analyze everything that's in that model. By selecting this elevation view filter option, and if I go in here and show you what that does, and if I go elevation and I say edit, what you'll see is these elements are turned off for you by default. So when you go to apply and insert your elevation view, by selecting this elevation view filter, it's turning off those objects. So the only thing that's going to be analyzed in the model when it's being created as a working drawing is going to be the elements that need to be seen. Your walls, windows, doors, roofs, ceilings, floors, your decking material. Again, all of those things that you would want to show on the exterior of your plants. So that's one time-saving tip that I always point out, just because elevations without that view filter option turned on will take a lot longer to insert than if they did not have those elements in them. So next I want to talk about adding extra lights to a light fixture. So adding extra lights to a light fixture can definitely help with how the light is going to be viewed in that scene. Now in my drawing right now, I have a light source in here, and if I double click on that light source, it'll bring up its properties. And in here I can go to the lights tab, and once I'm in the lights tab, I can see, and it's kind of hard on this one here, but you can see these little light sources that sit underneath the light bulbs. And those are just the actual light sources for each individual light bulb. So what you can do is you can add in each individual light source. So if I go cancel here, actually we'll do it this way. I'll go back into properties and I'll just delete those other ones out. So I'll go back into lights, and whatever one is highlighted in red is the one that is current. So right now that second one in is the current one. So I'm going to go in and say delete that one out. And then I'm going to select the next one. That's the middle one. That's the one I want to keep. And I'll say delete. And I'll say delete. And then I'll say delete. So right now I only have one light source in this light. If I say OK to that, when I render this, all these other lights won't have a light source to them. So you'll see just one light source from this one bulb shining down. It's not going to be a very accurate depiction of what the light would look like. So that's why it's an option that you can add in multiple lights as well. So we go back in and we say properties. What we can then do is go back into lights, and you can say, well, I want to add in a new light. So I'm going to say add, and I want to use this same 11 watt compact fluorescent light. So that's going to be under my interiors, and I'm going to say fluorescent. We'll say pendant, 11 watt, compact, fluorescent. Oh, it's a lamp, sorry. And we're going to go down to our interior lamps, and we'll say 11 watt fluorescent lamp, and we'll say OK. And you can see here that it adds it up here at the top of our model. Well, I can use this as a reference and say, well, it should be ½ inch below that. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say I want that to be custom, and I'll say a negative ½ inch, and that will drop it down to the height that I need to. And then I'm just going to say I want to go to the maximum of the edge of the, sorry, go back to custom on that one. This is the one that I want to be maximum, and it will move it all the way to the edge of my design here. So it's going all the way to the edge. And this is where you can go through and you can say, I need to start adjusting these to be where they need to go. So again, if I look at this as a reference, X would be, I need one of these to be 0, so this would be 0, and that should move it towards the center there. And so this is going to be 0, and then I'm going to make this one, let's just go -1 foot, and it will start to move that light source away. And you can see here, if I turn this into rendered outline, it might be a bit easier to see. You can see how I can start to move this along that path, and I can say -1 foot 2 and -1 foot 3 to add in those additional light sources. So again, I can say add, and we'll again do interior lamps. We'll select that and we'll say OK. And again, we're going to set this to be custom -1/2 inch, because that's not going to change. It's just going to be the X value that's going to change, because we want to keep them all in line. And then I can go in and say, again, I want to change the X value to be +1 foot 3, and that will move it over to this last light bulb. So if I go back in here and I say I want this to be custom, I'll say 1 foot 3, and it will move that light source to the end bulb in my list. And I would go through and do the other options as well, just to add those in. But that's how you would add additional light sources to your lights. And what this is going to do is it's now going to show each individual bulb casting a light down in your scene. So you'll get a more photorealistic rendering and a light source path of where your lights are coming from. One of the other things you want to adjust in here is the brightness percentage. So depending on how bright you want this to be, this is the overall brightness that's how it's going to affect the scene. Most of ours are set to 1000. Since I have 5 light sources on this one, I dropped it down to 500. That is something that you can play around with, and that's one of the advantages of having the different rendering settings in Envisioneer, is you can create very quick renderings to see how lights are going to look in your scene. Once you're happy with it, you can then bump the quality up so that it renders at a longer rate, but you're going to get a more photorealistic rendering. By doing the lower quality renderings first, you're going to get an idea of how the lights are going to look, but it's not going to take you 30-45 minutes. It should take a couple minutes just to get an idea of how those light sources are going to look in your scene. So I'm going to say OK to that. And the next thing I want to talk about is how to change a material on a truss or a deck member. So this question comes up quite a bit as well. And when you add in a truss run, so if I go up here and I say insert timber frames, and let's just say I add in this Fink truss run. I go from here to here and I add this in like so. When I look at this in a 3D view, I'm going to see those trusses, and I'm going to see how they look in that design. And I'm just going to turn this into rendered outline view, and they're always going to be set to wood. If I go to use my materials paintbrush like I can with other elements, and I try to paint these, it's not going to accept the paint. And the same is true with decks. If I go in and I add in a deck, and I'll just drop a deck in off the back here, so landscape, and we'll go into deck and decks, and let's just add in a deck here off the back, and we'll drop that in right there and say finish. And I look at that in that same 3D front view, I can see my truss and my deck, and if I go to apply a material to either of these, it won't take it. So again, I'll just go in, I'll say I want to use, let's just go to colors, I'll say bleach white, and I try to apply either to the deck or the truss, and it won't take it. And that's because these elements are being referenced from the catalog. So what we need to do is we need to create a new element to apply to it. So what you can do here is if I go back up to, actually let's just go in here, we'll select this deck, we'll go right click, properties, and in here I can say that I want to add in a new framing member. So I'm going to go in and say frame, and I want a new deck top or new decking board. So I'm going to hit select. So right now it's using this material or this member, and it has this material assigned to it. Well, I want this to be a different color. So let's just say I go in, I say add element. I want to use everything else the same, but I'm going to call this painted decking. And I'm going to change the appearance of that to, instead of being that pressure treated, I'm going to apply that painted material. So I'm just going to go up to colors again, and I'll just select that bleach white, and I'll say OK. And then I'll say OK and OK. And what that does is it changes that material on just that deck. And then I can say OK, and it changes it for me. With the truss run, what you could do is you could go in to your members and select your insert timber frames. And what you can do here is in the catalog, you can go right click, add elements, and you would just call this Fink Truss Painted. And this would be like a decorative truss that you would show inside. And then you would go in and say, well, I want to adjust the framing member that's being used, and I need this to be painted. So I would select that 2x6, add elements, and just call it painted. And forgot the A, there we go, painted. And then under appearance, I would again just make sure that it's using that material that I want to use. And then we'll go up to colors, and we'll say, let's just say burgundy. We'll say OK, and OK, and OK. And now it will be that burgundy color. And then we say OK. When I go back into my 2D plan view, that was the original one, so we'll delete that one out. I'll add in this truss painted and drop that in. And now I will see that burgundy truss. So if you want to paint a deck or a truss profile, you need to assign those members to have that color, and then assign that member to be used in that particular deck or in that particular truss run. So that's how you could paint and get a different look for those two particular elements. Another option that we have in Envisioneer is the double veneer wall. So whenever you add a wall in Envisioneer, if I select the, let's just go down to my stone walls here. So that's interior, that's stucco. Let's just add in a 2x6 stone wall. And let's say I want to create a outdoor barbecue pit type area. So I'm going to create like a U shape here. I'm going to turn on F8 to keep my ortho turned on. And I'm just going to draw in some walls here real quick. Nothing fancy, just a U-shaped design. When I look at this in a 3D view, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see the drywall of that wall. And that's because it's not a closed circuit of walls. So it assumes that it's going to be drywall. So what I want to do is I want to select these walls. I'm just going to select those three. I'm going to go right click, properties, and I'm going to say I want this to be a little bit different. So I'm going to say, first off, I only want you to be level to a certain height, and we'll say 3 feet. So I'll make sure that the walls are only 3 feet high. I'm then going to go in and say that I want to adjust the basic tab, and I'm going to say I want to force the left and the right side of that wall to be exterior. And what this does is it now applies that exterior veneer on both sides of the wall. And when I say OK, I will now see stone around both sides of the wall itself. And I can go into the actual front camera view again, and we can now see that stone wall at that 3 foot height. And I can start adding in my cabinets to sit within here to create my outdoor fire pit or cooking area, kitchen area. So that is how you can create a double veneer wall in Envisioneer. Another option is cathedral ceilings. And if I go back into 2D plan view, and in here I have a ceiling set up for our dining area, and I've already dropped in a ceiling. When you add a ceiling in, it will always go in as a flat ceiling. So if I just go in here, and I'm just going to grab that camera one, and I'm just going to quickly pull it into the design here. And I guess while I'm doing this, this could be another little tool tip as well that I use quite frequently, is this little preview area allows you to pretty quickly just move the camera wherever you want it to go, and then you can adjust the target to move exactly where you want to go. And then you can also fine tune it and say, well, I'm only 6 feet tall, so I want to make sure that I'm looking from where my head would be. And you can go in and make adjustments to the target height as well and see exactly how that's going to look. In here, we're going to make this 8 foot because I'm going to be looking up to show that cathedral ceiling. And I'm just going to delete these lights out because they'll be in the way. So I'm just going to get rid of those. We'll put that one back. And then what I'll do is I'll go back into 2D, and I'm going to select that ceiling. And again, you'll notice that the ceiling is selected because it says one object selected, and the primary is the 1/2 inch drywall ceiling. So in this room, I want to create a cathedral. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to say right click, properties, and I'm going to say cathedral. Do not make any other changes. Say OK. What that does is it's now converted that to be a cathedral ceiling. And the reason why we didn't make any changes is because only one arrow is selected. So if we made any changes, it would only affect that one arrow. And this is where I want to say, well, these two arrows are going to be the same. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say right click, properties, and I'm going to say that I want these two edges to be a gable end. And I'm going to get rid of the skirt width on that because I don't need to see the skirt. And basically what that does is it just gets rid of that ceiling surface. So now the walls are going to be visible in that gable end of our cathedral ceiling. And I can say OK. And now we get the cathedral straight through. Over here on the left and the right side, what I want to do is I want to change, first of all, the slope, because the slope of my roof is a 812. So I want my ceiling to also be an 812. So I'm going to select this arrow and this arrow. I'm going to go right click, properties. I'm going to change the skirt width. I want that to be 2 feet. And I'm going to change this from degrees to be 8 and 12. So that way I know it's going to follow the same slope as my roof. And then I can say OK. And it'll adjust like so. And this was the reason why I kept the lights in, because I can now select these by holding down my shift key. I can select the other one. And I know I need to move this quite a distance. So I'm going to select the control key on my keyboard. And then I'm going to use the arrow key on my keyboard to move that basically 1 foot at a time. This is going to be stored under your program settings, underneath your drawing aids. You will see your nudge distance. By default, we have it set to 1 inch and 1 foot. So if you use just the arrow keys, it will move 1 inch. If you hold the control key down, it will move that 1 foot. Those are the defaults that we ship with. You can set that up to be whatever you want and what you're comfortable with. But it's a nice little handy feature that allows you to move things pretty quickly and accurately because it sets it to those distances. I'm just going to say OK to that, and then I'll just select those again, and I'm just going to move these in a couple of inches. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That looks about right. And then I'll select these two, and then Control 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to move those in. And now when I look at that in that 3D camera view, I'll see that cathedral ceiling. I'll see those lights in the tray part of that ceiling itself, or in the skirt edge, sorry, of that ceiling itself. And that's how you can add in a cathedral ceiling. Over here, what you're going to see is I can do one of two things here. I can say I want to auto extend this wall so that it meets the roof. So I can just go up and say top and bottom, auto extend, find the roof, and fill in that void. Or I can go in and say undo, and I can select the back edge of that ceiling, so right there. I'm going to go into the properties, and I'm going to change this one. So instead of being a gable, I'm going to say I want you to be straight, but I'm going to change this to be 90 degrees. And what that does is it just basically forces that back edge of the ceiling surface to rise up and fill in that void. What this will do differently than the wall option is it will follow the material will be the same as the ceiling. So if you want this to be the same color as your wall, then you would extend your wall up. If you want to have this set as a different color to match the ceiling, then you would use the ceiling option. Either way will work. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the materials in that designed area. Next, we're going to look at matching surfaces. So right now I have my roof added in, and as you can see here, the ridge lines just don't line up, but I want this to be all one surface. So what we can do here is we can actually go in, and it's a little bit easier if you're in a 2D plan view, or sorry, 2D designer's view. It's a little bit easier to see. And all you do is you simply select the roof, right click, and you can select the match planes option. You then simply select the plane that you want, so your primary roof surface, and then you can select your secondary roof surface, and it will then go through, and if I turn that back into a plan view, it will match those planes up and clean it up for you. A nice quick way of adjusting your surfaces so that they all stay in line and you get one continuous surface through this area. This can also be used if we look out the back here, and if I go to the back camera, right now we have, and I'm going to turn that into a rendered outline as well, we have a hip roof over our back door. And let's say we want to adjust how that looks. I want this to be all one slope and it's just a continuation over that door. So again, I would select the roof, right click, match planes. I would select the main roof and then that part of the roof, and it would drop that roof all the way down and continue that all the way through. And that would have given me that continuous look for that one roof surface by just simply selecting the match planes option. And then in your 2D plan view, it would just be one continuous surface all the way through. Another option that I like to talk about is the mold windows option. So a lot of times I see plans that come in or people are trying to create specific types of windows, and what we'll see is they'll bring in a window. Let's just do a casement window, and we'll drop in a 3-foot by 5-foot window, and we'll drop that in here. And then they'll bring another one in and they'll place it right beside it like that. And basically what you're getting is you're going to get two windows, but you're also creating an issue when it comes to framing, because now Envisioneer sees a 1/16 inch wall in between those two windows, and it's going to try and put a member in there. So instead of doing that, what I recommend doing is selecting the window itself, bring it in, put it in the area that you want, right click, properties, and whatever the width of that window should be. So if I want 3 of these, make it 9 feet, and then you can divide that into 3 panels, and that will create that 3-panel window. And then over here you can call this 3 by 3-foot 5 casement window. And just by doing that, don't forget underneath your quantity, you will also want to make sure that you add the 3 in there. So that way you know that you're looking at 3. You can even do 3-350. So that way it's showing up that way in your plans as well. So you know it's 3 individual windows. And then you don't have to worry about anything showing up in between. You can further refine this. You can go in and select the properties of it. And again, you can continue to add in vertical separations if you wanted to between the windows. So that way you get a little bit more of a break between them, and you just adjust those details again to match how you want that design to look. And if we look at that from our front view window, we'll see that it is one continuous window instead of 3 individual windows with a small wall in between. So that covers everything I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to open up the questions section here. So I'm just going to go back into a 2D plan view, and I'll open this up, and we have So I think we covered that dimension question, but if I didn't, let me know if you still have questions on that. We can revisit it. But we were able to adjust that text by just creating a new style. And then you can update that style for that text string and using the auto exterior option. Another question is there a way to have two exterior finishes on a wall, example stone or brick, with a board and batten above? Yes. So if we go into our 2D plan view, in the catalog right now, there is a wall in here. If I just go replace, we have a wall in here under stucco veneer of a 2x6 stucco wall with a stone base. If I go into the properties of that wall, essentially what we do here is we're applying a trim to the exterior side. And that exterior trim is going to be the stone base. So while I have a stucco wall here, you would have that be your board and batten and then your stone underneath. And in the catalog, there's already some stone bases and brick bases added in that you can apply to your walls. And it's just a matter of making sure that you have this set up so that the base of the trim starts at the bottom of the wall. So you got bottom of trim to bottom of wall, and that will place that in. And then we're also offsetting that 11.5 inches down to cover any floor material that we want to add in. So it drops it straight down. And that's how you would create that type of look. So in the catalog, there's already an example for you. You can take that one and add to it and create a new wall type using your board and batten. But that would be your starting template, is using that option right there. And then if I just say, okay, just to show you how that looks, and then we look at that in our 3D view again from the front, you'd see that there's the stone and then the stucco. And again, like I said, you can adjust that to be your board and batten. So let's see, we got some other questions that come up. So what is the best way to put recessed lights in the slope part of a cathedral ceiling? So you can add in your lights into the cathedral ceiling. So since I have the ceiling added in, I don't need to reinvent the wheel and try and figure out angles and slopes and degrees. I can just go into the properties and I can say, if I change this to be degrees, I know that that is 33.7 degrees. So I'll go in and I'll say cancel, and I'll take this light here and I'll go duplicate, and I'll move this over to here, and I'll go into 3D camera view, and I can see that light right there, and I'll go right click, properties, and I'm going to adjust the axis of it, and I just got to remember which one it is here, and we'll go, unfortunately you can't type in there just yet, I'm not sure why, but we'll go 33 like so, and we'll say okay. And did I get that right? A little bit off, but I can take that light and I can now rotate it this way. Wrong way. And 2D, rotate this around that way, and I can see that in that view. And I can now say I want to elevate it. Now this is where you may run into a bit of trial and error trying to figure out exactly the height that you want this to be at. So if I kind of move that in towards the middle, I can say roughly I probably want this to go up about 3 feet. So let's just go 11 feet here, and we'll say okay, and okay, and it's a little bit high. So we'll go back down and we'll say elevate, and we'll do 10'6". Let's do 10'2", just to see where that brings us. Close. So again, it's a little bit of trial and error trying to get it into that specific spot. But from there, once you start getting it, you can then just fine tune it to get it exactly where you want it to sit, like so. And once you exceed the height of the room, so in this case here, I have my ceiling height set to 8 foot 1 1/8, or sorry, my ceiling height is 8 feet. Since I want that light to shine down, I'm probably going to adjust the ceiling height in here to be 12 feet high, and it'll allow that light to show from that high up because that light is above the ceiling height. So by adjusting that, we'll be able to see that light in the room once it's been elevated up. But that's how you would go about doing it. And then from there, you can just simply select it and say mirror, and you really only have to do it the one time. You can mirror that one and say, no, I don't want to duplicate or delete the original. And then I'm just going to duplicate these ones by duplicating it like that. And now I get all those lights added in. Just by manipulating that one light, I'm able to get the other lights in as well. The next question is, how do I make an arched double hung window? How do I make an arched double hung window? Okay. If I go into 2D plan view, and let's just delete this window out, and we'll add in a window, and you want a arched double hung window. So if I go into double hung, and I'm assuming you want the top to be arched. So I'll drop this in, center it on the wall. Properties. So the only other way you're going to get this to be a arched double hung window is by adding in a highlight. By adding in a highlight, you can set that to be arched based on the size of the window, and you would get something like that. From that highlight, you can control again the left and right leg heights here. You can control the number of panels if you want that just to be 1, 1, and 1, and that'll just make it similar to that style of window that you have there. But you can't. Let me see. Maybe we'll do that one first. We'll add that in, and that'll create that arch there. The other option is underneath custom, we have a arched window here, and I can place that window in. The problem with this window is I don't think I can adjust it to be double hung. Yeah, because you'll lose the arch. Yeah, so the only way is to add that in as a highlight. As soon as you change it to be a double hung, it automatically gets rid of the variable to arch the top of it. And that's just the type of window that it is. The other option for you is you can create the window, or if you have a 3D block of the window, you can import it in as a block and then include it in your catalog for future use as well. But those are going to be the only two ways of creating a double hung with an arch in it. And another question is, how would you create a standing seam metal roof that really pops? I think I know what you mean by this, and we have the standing metal seam roof option in the program already. So if I go into a 3D view and just go into front view, and I look at that roof, right now I have the shingles on here. If I use the materials paintbrush, I can apply a material to it that will show the standing metal seam. So if I go back down to, I thought we had a metal roof under here. Let me see. Yeah, so there's a couple of different metal roof options in here, and you can apply that to the roof. Now, is it going to show up in 3D? No, that's not going to be something that you can do with this. I can go in and say underneath the properties, I can say under appearance and metal, and I can try and use the bump map feature to try and give it a little bit of depth. But I'm not sure it's going to give you exactly what you want when you say pop. And then what we're basically going to do here is applying a bump feature. I'm just going to essentially select the exact same material, which I probably should figure out what that is before I go and select it. This is called Duchenne. Okay, so this is a material that I added in, so it's not going to be in the catalog. So let's try and grab a different material, and we'll select cancel, cancel, cancel. Let's just grab this one. We'll say OK. And then I'll go in here. And if I select this, it's called Metro Brown. And it's 6 foot by 2 foot. And that's important. You want to know the tile height and the tile width. So I'll say OK. And then I'll go back in, here. And I want that to be Metro Brown. And we'll select the Metro Brown and unlock that. 6 foot, 2 foot. And we want that to be standard. We'll say OK. And from here, what you can do is you can apply a bump scale. And what this will do is it will give it the effect of a bump map. So I'm just going to bump this up to, let's just say 6. And we'll see if that does anything really to it. We'll say OK. And OK. And OK. And you won't see much in this 3D view, but when you render it, the rendering engine should take that bump map into consideration, and it should apply a bit of a bump to it that should try and make it pop a little bit. Other than manually adding in a 3D texture or a 3D block that has the ripple look to it, you're really not going to get much in how that's going to adjust just by adjusting the material itself. That would be something that a block would have to do. So another question is how do we create keystroke shortcuts for a line, etc. So those are going to be located underneath the if I go back into 2D, line is already set up for you. It's just basically L on your keyboard will be line, and then you can start drawing away. If you want to set it up yourself under settings, and pardon me, I just got to try and find it. So under settings, program settings, keyboard. In here, you can see all the different keyboard shortcuts that are available for the commands that are in Envisioneer. And as an example, you mentioned line. So if I go down to, I believe it's modified line or draw line. It is going to be under layout line. So when you select layout line, you can see L on your keyboard will activate line. If I want to do a circle, nope, we don't have anything set up for that. Oh, here it is, circle. You can do CI for circle, and that will initiate your circle radius option. So these are already kind of in the program for you. You just have to simply adjust them, but they're all underneath your keyboard option under program settings. And I think that was it. I think there was one other question, and it was in regards to supplying that one material. Yeah, if you want that material, I can definitely get that to you. That's not a problem. Perfect. Well, that looks like that's all the questions. I want to thank everybody for attending today. If you do have any questions at all, if nothing's coming to mind right now, but something pops up in your head after the class, you can actually just send that into our support department, and they'll be able to answer any questions you may have as well. I want to thank you all for attending, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, everyone.